The bet was placed on a winter night when arrogance tasted sweeter than blood, and Jareth Morozov never imagined a wager made in cruelty would become the chain that bound his immortal heart. "You've grown soft, cousin," Vladek sneered across the marble table in the undercroft of the Crimson Court, his pale fingers drumming against crystal that had witnessed 1,000 years of vampire politics. "All this talk of modernizing our relationship with humans, of coexistence. You sound like a lovesick fool, and you haven't even taken a bride." Jareth's silver eyes flickered with irritation beneath the chandelier's blood-red light. His white hair fell past his shoulders, a mark of his ancient bloodline, and his alabaster skin seemed to glow with an inner coldness that made even other vampires uneasy. As the vampire king of the Northern Territories, he commanded respect through power, not sentiment. The accusation of softness was an insult he couldn't ignore. "Choose your next words carefully, Vladek," Jareth said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "I've killed for less, then prove me wrong." Vladek leaned forward, his cruel smile revealing fangs that gleamed like polished bone. "There's a human girl who works at that pathetic coffee shop on Morrison Street. I've seen you walk past it during your night walks. Elena Everhart. Poor as dirt, struggling to pay for her dying mother's medication, completely ordinary. Propose to her. Make her believe you love her. Bring her before the court as your intended bride within 3 months, and I'll cede my claim to the Eastern hunting grounds and publicly acknowledge your progressive policies." "And if I refuse this childish game?" Jareth asked, though something dangerous had already sparked in his chest. The thrill of a challenge, perhaps. Or maybe just wounded pride. "Then admit you've gone soft, step down from active leadership of the council, and let those of us with stronger spines handle vampire affairs." Vladek's eyes glittered with malice. "Unless you're afraid you couldn't make a simple human girl fall for you. The mighty vampire king, reduced to fearing rejection from a mortal?" The other vampires around the table watched with predatory interest. They were the old blood, the ones who still remembered when humans were nothing but cattle, who resented Jareth's recent push for treaties and cooperation between their worlds. This bet was more than a game. It was a political trap. If he refused, he'd look weak. If he accepted and failed, he'd be humiliated. "But if he succeeded, 3 months, Jareth said coldly. "I'll have her wearing my ring and believing every word of devotion I speak. And when I win, Vladek, you'll spend the next century in the western wastes guarding our borders from rogue vampires. Alone." Vladek's smile widened. "Agreed. Let's see if the vampire king can charm a human heart or if you've forgotten how to be anything but a politician." The bet was sealed with blood, as all vampire contracts were. Jareth cut his palm and let 3 drops fall into the ceremonial chalice, binding himself to the terms. He left the Crimson Court with his pride intact but something uncomfortable churning in his stomach. He'd accepted a bet that treated a human woman as a pawn, exactly the kind of behavior he'd been arguing against in council sessions. But he'd won battles and wars, negotiated treaties with werewolf packs and fey courts, survived assassination attempts and political coups over his 5 centuries of existence. Making one struggling human girl believe he cared for her would be simple. He'd woo her, win the bet, then compensate her handsomely for her time and send her on her way with enough money to solve all her problems. She'd be better off for having met him, really. That's what he told himself as he walked through the cold February streets toward Morrison Street, his long black coat billowing behind him. The modern city rose around him in steel and glass, but beneath it lay the old-world vampire courts hidden in converted castles, blood banks that served a different clientele, and ancient creatures adapting to contemporary times while clinging to their timeless traditions. The coffee shop was called Moonbeam Café, a modest establishment wedged between a bookstore and a pharmacy. Through the window, Jareth could see warm yellow lights and a handful of late-night customers. And there, behind the counter, was Elena Everhart. She wasn't classically beautiful in the way vampire nobles prized no porcelain perfection or statuesque elegance. But there was something arresting about her anyway. Dark hair pulled into a messy bun, warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled at customers, and a genuine kindness in her expression that seemed almost out of place in this harsh city. She moved with efficient grace despite the exhaustion evident in the set of her shoulders, and when she laughed at something a customer said, the sound carried through the glass like music. Jareth felt nothing, of course. She was pretty enough, and that would make the charade easier, but she was human, mortal, temporary, a means to an end. He pushed open the door, and a small bell chimed. The scent of coffee and fresh pastries washed over him along with something else, Elena's scent, honey and vanilla with an underlying warmth that spoke of life and vitality. His vampire senses registered her heartbeat, steady and strong, and the rush of blood through her veins. He hadn't fed before coming here, and for a moment, hunger flickered through him before he crushed it down. Elena looked up from the espresso machine and smiled, that same genuine warmth he'd seen through the window. "Hi there, welcome to Moonbeam, what can I get you?" "Coffee black," Jareth said, approaching the counter. He studied her face, noting the faint shadows under her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands that spoke of too many shifts without enough rest. "You're here late. Someone called in sick, so I'm covering." She poured the coffee with practiced ease, and he noticed the small bandage on her thumb, the chapped skin of her hands from constant washing. "Plus, the extra hour's help, that'll be $3.50. Jareth handed her a 20, and when their fingers brushed he felt the warmth of her skin against his cold touch. She startled slightly, meeting his eyes, and for a moment something passed between them. Awareness, perhaps. He was used to humans reacting to him: fear, attraction, unease. Vampires couldn't fully hide what they were, not from attentive humans. There was always something slightly wrong, slightly other, that made mortals nervous even when they couldn't articulate why. But Elena just smiled apologetically. "Sorry, your hand is freezing, you should get some gloves. February in this city is brutal." "I'll consider it," he said, taking the coffee he didn't need or want. "Keep the change." Her eyes widened. That's almost $17. Are you sure? You said you needed the extra hours. Consider it a tip for staying open late." He took a sip of the coffee, forcing his body to tolerate it. Vampires could consume human food and drink, but it provided no nourishment and tasted like ash. "I'm Jareth, by the way, Elena." She pocketed the money with visible relief, and guilt flickered through him. This girl was clearly struggling, working herself to exhaustion for money he considered pocket change. Making her fall in love with him as part of a bet suddenly seemed even crueler than it had in the abstract. But he'd made a blood oath. Breaking it would cost him power, status, and quite possibly his position as king. He had responsibilities to his people, and losing this bet would embolden the traditionalists who wanted to return to the old ways of treating humans as prey. In the long run, winning would serve the greater good. Elena would recover from a broken engagement with a healthy bank account. It was pragmatic. "You work here every night?" he asked, leaning against the counter with calculated casualness. "Most nights. I'm also taking online classes during the day, and my mom needs care, so I sleep whenever I can fit it in." She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, but he could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "Why do you ask?" "I often walk this route at night. Insomnia," he lied smoothly. "It's nice to know there's somewhere warm to stop, and now I know the barista's name." Elena laughed, a sound that was somehow both tired and genuinely amused. "Well, I'll be here most nights for the foreseeable future, so stop by whenever you need coffee and conversation." "I'll do that," Jareth said, and he meant it. Not because he cared, he told himself, but because this was the first move in his strategy. Build rapport. Become a familiar presence. Show interest in her life. Classic manipulation techniques he'd used in political negotiations for centuries. He returned the next night and the night after that. Each time he'd order coffee, tip generously, and talk with Elena during slow moments. He learned about her mother's illness, a degenerative condition that required expensive medication and constant care. He learned about her dream of becoming a teacher, currently on hold because she couldn't afford to commit to a full-time university program. He learned that she'd been alone since her father died when she was 16, that she had no siblings, no support system except a neighbor who occasionally checked on her mother. She was trapped in a cycle of survival with no way out, drowning in medical debt and exhaustion, and yet she remained kind. She smiled at rude customers. She slipped extra pastries to the homeless man who sometimes sat outside. She asked Jareth about his life with genuine curiosity, and he found himself crafting an elaborate fiction: a wealthy consultant who traveled frequently, an insomniac who found peace in nighttime walks, a man without family who understood loneliness. The lies came easily, too easily. And Elena believed them all because she had a trusting heart, which made the deception feel worse each time. "You know, you're the best part of my shifts," Elena told him one night in mid-February, about 2 weeks into his campaign. The cafe was empty except for them, snow falling softly outside the windows. "I know that probably sounds pathetic, but it's nice to have someone to talk to who doesn't just bark their order and leave." "It doesn't sound pathetic," Jareth said, and something in his chest tightened uncomfortably. "I enjoy our conversations as well." "Really?" She looked skeptical. "I mostly complain about exhaustion and talk about my mom's doctor's appointments. Not exactly riveting stuff. You also talk about the books you're reading, the lesson plans you design for fun, and your theory that the bookstore next door is definitely a front for some kind of mystery operation, because no one ever seems to buy anything but it stays in business." He smiled, a real smile, and watched her face light up. You're more interesting than you give yourself credit for, Elena. She blushed, actually blushed, and looked down at the counter. You're good for my ego, Jareth. Dangerous probably, but good. The word dangerous struck him as unintentionally accurate. He was dangerous. He was a predator sitting across from prey, a creature of darkness weaving a trap around her kind heart. And yet he kept coming back, night after night, and somewhere around the third week, he realized he was arriving earlier than necessary and staying longer than his plan required. Come with me tomorrow night, he said suddenly, the words escaping before he'd fully thought them through. Not here, out. There's a gallery opening downtown that I need to attend, and I'd like company. Elena blinked. Are you asking me on a date? Was he? This was part of the plan, of course. He needed to escalate from friendly customer to romantic interest, but the nervousness he felt waiting for her answer wasn't calculated. It was real, and that disturbed him. Yes, he said. If you're interested. I work tomorrow night, she said, and his stomach dropped in a way that was entirely inappropriate. Then she smiled. But I can switch shifts with Tommy. He owes me anyway. What time? 10. I'll pick you up here. He paused. Dress warmly. And Elena? Wear something that makes you feel beautiful. Not for me, he added quickly. For you. Her smile could have lit the entire city. Okay, it's a date. Jareth left the cafe with his heart racing in a way it hadn't in centuries, and the uncomfortable realization that he was looking forward to tomorrow night not because it served his strategy, but because he genuinely wanted to spend time with her. This was a problem. The gallery opening was at a converted warehouse in the Arts District, one of the many establishments owned by vampire benefactors who supported human artists as part of the ongoing integration efforts. Jareth had chosen it deliberately impressive enough to sweep Elena off her feet, public enough to start establishing her as his companion, but not so obviously vampiric that she'd realize what he was. He picked her up at the cafe at 10, and when she stepped outside, his breath caught. She wore a deep burgundy dress that brought out the warmth in her skin, her hair down in waves around her shoulders, and she'd done something to her eyes that made them look enormous and luminous. She was stunning, and the smile she gave him was nervous and hopeful and entirely too trusting. You look beautiful, he said, and meant it completely. You look like you stepped out of a magazine, she replied, taking in his tailored black suit and the long coat that hung perfectly from his shoulders. I'm going to feel underdressed. Impossible. You'll be the most captivating person there. He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. Even through the layers of clothing, he could feel her warmth, her pulse, the living vitality that was so foreign to his existence. They drove to the gallery in his car, a sleek black vehicle that had cost more than most people made in a year, and Elena was quiet, taking in the luxury leather seats and the classical music playing softly from the speakers. Jareth, she said finally, you're clearly wealthy. Like really wealthy. And I work in a coffee shop and can barely make rent. Why are you interested in me? It was a fair question and one he should have anticipated. He pulled into a parking space before turning to face her, considering his answer. He could lie, weave some romantic fiction about love transcending social class. Instead, something compelled him toward a dangerous proximity to truth. Because in a world full of people who want things from me, you just want good conversation and someone to share your coffee breaks with, he said. Because you have every reason to be bitter and cruel and you choose kindness instead. Because when I'm with you, I feel less alone. That last part slipped out unintentionally, and Elena's expression softened into something tender and dangerous to his carefully constructed walls. I feel less alone with you too, she whispered. The gallery was packed with the beautiful and wealthy, humans mingling unknowingly with vampires who'd perfected the art of blending in. Jareth kept Elena close, his hand at the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd. He introduced her to a few carefully selected contacts, human allies, who wouldn't question his sudden companion, who'd help spread word that the Vampire King was courting someone. Elena was nervous at first, overwhelmed by the opulence and the obvious wealth on display, but as they moved through the exhibits, she relaxed. She had opinions about the art, thoughtful observations that revealed education and intelligence, and Jareth found himself genuinely engaged in their discussions. This one, she said, stopping in front of a painting that depicted a figure caught between light and shadow, neither fully in one world nor the other. This one breaks my heart. Why? Jareth asked, studying the piece with new interest. Because they look so lonely, trapped between two places, not belonging to either. Can you imagine how isolating that would be? To be forever stuck in the in-between? She tilted her head and her voice dropped to something softer. Though I guess sometimes that's how life feels anyway. Like you're stuck between who you were and who you want to be, never quite making it to either side. Jareth stared at the painting. Elena's words echoing in his mind. She'd just perfectly described his existence. 5 centuries of being caught between his vampire nature and his growing belief that they needed to evolve beyond their predatory past. Between his position as king and his increasing isolation from any genuine connection. Between the monster he was born as and the person he was trying to become. "Yes," he said quietly, "I can imagine." Elena looked at him, really looked at him, and he felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with his vampire nature being discovered. She saw something in him, some truth he hadn't meant to reveal, and instead of pulling away, she reached out and took his hand. "We all feel that way sometimes," she said. "But I think the in-between is where the most interesting people live. The ones brave enough to stand in the uncomfortable space between 2 worlds." He squeezed her hand. This brave, tired, kind human girl who had no idea she was holding hands with a creature that could kill her in seconds, who was courting her as part of a cruel bet, who represented everything she'd been taught to fear in stories, and the guilt that had been simmering in his gut since this began roared to life. "Elena," he started, not knowing what he was going to say. "Confess? Warn her away? Apologize?" "There's the Vampire King," a voice said behind them, dripping with amusement, "and with a human companion. How progressive." Jareth turned to find Vladik approaching, flanked by 2 other vampire nobles. They were impeccably dressed, inhumanly beautiful, and radiating predatory menace. Elena tensed beside him, picking up on the danger even if she didn't understand its source. "Vladik," Jareth said coldly, "I didn't realize you frequented human art galleries." "Oh, I don't usually. But when I heard you'd be here with your new pet project, I had to come see for myself." Vladik's eyes fixed on Elena with undisguised contempt. "So this is the coffee shop girl, Elena Everhart. How charmingly ordinary." "Watch your tone," Jareth said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. He felt his control slipping, the predator in him rising to defend what was his. Except Elena wasn't his. She was a pawn in a game, a victim of his arrogance, and yet every instinct screamed at him to put himself between her and Vladik. "It's fine," Elena said, though her voice shook slightly. "I know I don't fit in here. You don't have to defend me, Jareth." "Yes, Jareth," Vladik said with a cruel smile. "Don't strain yourself defending the help. We all know this is temporary anyway. 3 months, wasn't it?" Elena frowned. 3 months? Jareth's blood ran cold. Vladik wouldn't. Breaking the silence around the bet violated its terms, but there were ways to hint, to imply, to plant seeds of doubt without technically revealing the details. "Nothing," Jareth said quickly. "Vladik is being deliberately cryptic to cause trouble. It's what he does. I'm just surprised to see how quickly you're moving." Vladik continued, his eyes glittering with malice. "From first meeting to public dates in what, 3 weeks? One might think you're on some kind of timeline. Or perhaps trying to win something. Enough." Jareth stepped forward, and even the humans in the gallery felt the shift in the air, the sudden tension that made people unconsciously move away. "You're testing my patience. And you're testing the patience of those who made certain agreements with you." Vladik shot back. "Don't forget what you owe, cousin. And don't get too attached to your little project. Humans are so terribly fragile." It was a threat, barely veiled, and Jareth felt rage surge through him. His hand went to Elena's arm, pulling her closer, his body shifting to shield her. "If you touch her, you'll what, break your oath? Fail your bet? Show everyone that the mighty Jareth Morozov has actually developed feelings for a human?" Vladik laughed. "This is even better than I imagined. You're actually falling for her." Elena pulled away from Jareth, her face pale. "What is he talking about? What bet? What oath?" "Elena, let me explain." "No." She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "What did he mean by 3 months? By winning something?" "Jareth, what is this?" The gallery had gone quiet, dozens of eyes on them, human and vampire alike. Jareth could feel his carefully constructed plan crumbling, could see the hurt and confusion in Elena's eyes, and the worst part was that he deserved every bit of her anger. "Not here," he said quietly. "Please, Elena, let me take you somewhere private, and I'll explain everything." Her voice cracked. "Will you explain why someone I'm starting to care about apparently has me on some kind of timeline? Why your cousin thinks I'm a project you're trying to win?" "Yes," Jareth said, because there was no point in lying now. "All of it, I promise." Elena looked at Vladik, then back at Jareth, and he could see her mind working, piecing together implications. She was intelligent. She'd figure out that something was very wrong, that she'd been manipulated, and she'd hate him for it. He'd known this moment would come eventually. He'd planned to end things after winning the bet, but he hadn't expected it to hurt like this. "Take me home," Elena said flatly, "and then stay away from me." "Elena, now Jareth, or I'll walk." He took her home in silence, the drive that had been filled with hope and warmth on the way there now cold and tense. When he pulled up outside her apartment building, a rundown complex in a bad part of town, she got out without looking at him. "Thank you for the evening," she said with bitter formality. "It was very enlightening." "Please let me explain," Jareth said, following her to the building's entrance. "It's not what you think, really. Because I think you approached me for some reason other than genuine interest. I think there's some kind of game or bet involved, and I'm the idiot who fell for it." Tears glittered in her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. "I should have known. Men like you don't date women like me unless there's an angle. I just forgot that for a little while." "Men like me?" Jareth repeated, and the phrase stung more than it should have. "Rich, powerful, out of my league." She laughed bitterly. "God, I'm so stupid. You probably thought it was hilarious, the poor exhausted waitress who got all starry-eyed over a few kind words and generous tips." "No," Jareth said urgently, reaching for her hand. When she tried to pull away, he held on, gentle but firm. "Elena, listen to me. It started as, yes, there was a bet. A stupid, cruel bet made by arrogant men playing political games, but a bet." She went very still. "You asked me out because of a bet. I asked you out because Vladek challenged me to make you care about me within 3 months, and I was too proud and too stupid to refuse. But Elena, it stopped being about the bet weeks ago. What I feel when I'm with you is real." "What you feel?" She yanked her hand free. "How can anything you feel be real when everything between us is based on a lie? Did you laugh about me with your friends? Compare notes on how quickly the pathetic poor girl was falling for the act." "It wasn't an act." The words came out too loud, too intense, and Jareth forced himself to calm down. "At first, yes, I approached you with ulterior motives, but every conversation, every moment we've shared since then has been genuine. You make me feel human, Elena. You make me feel like I'm more than just the sum of my responsibilities and my nature." "Your nature," Elena repeated. "What does that mean? What are you, Jareth?" "Because your cousin called you a vampire king, and I thought that was just some weird nickname, but the way people reacted to you in that gallery, the way you moved, the coldness of your skin." Her voice trailed off, fear creeping into her expression. "Tell me I'm being crazy. Tell me vampires aren't real." Jareth stood very still. This was it, the moment where he could lie, could erase her memories with a vampire's compulsion, could make her forget this entire painful evening. It would be kinder, in a way. She'd go back to her life without the knowledge that creatures from nightmares were real, that she'd almost been claimed by one as part of a political game. But he was so tired of lying to her. "I can't tell you that," he said quietly. "Because vampires are real, and I am one. I'm the king of the Northern Territories, and I've been alive for over 500 years. The bet was that I could make you fall in love with me and agree to marry me within 3 months. If I won, I'd gain political leverage over the traditionalists in my court. If I lost, I'd lose status and power." Elena stumbled backward, her face draining of color. "You're insane. This is insane. Look at me, Elena. Really look. You already know the truth. You felt it every time we touched, how cold I am. You noticed I only ever meet you at night. You're intelligent enough to have seen the signs even if you didn't want to acknowledge them." He stepped into the streetlight, letting the harsh illumination highlight his unnatural pallor, his too sharp features. "I'm a monster who made a bet using your heart as the prize. You have every right to hate me." "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why are you telling me this? If you wanted to win your bet, why reveal everything?" "Because you deserve the truth. Because I'm a monster, but I'm trying very hard not to be, and lying to you anymore feels worse than losing everything I've built." He met her eyes. "And because somewhere in the process of trying to manipulate you, I actually fell in love with you, and I can't keep pretending I didn't." The words hung in the cold February air between them. Elena stared at him, her expression cycling through disbelief, anger, fear, and something else he couldn't quite identify. "You love me," she said flatly. "Yes, you're a vampire who made a bet to seduce me, and now you claim you love me, yes. And I'm just supposed to believe that? Supposed to forgive all the manipulation and lies because you caught feelings?" Her voice rose. "Do you have any idea how insulting that is? How it makes me feel to know that everything between us has been a game?" "I know," Jareth said quietly. "I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry, Elena. I should never have agreed to the bet. I should have refused, should have found another way to handle the political situation. But I was arrogant and prideful, and I thought I could control the situation without anyone getting hurt. Well, you were wrong." Tears spilled down her cheeks now. "Because I did fall for you, you bastard. I fell for your kind words and your generous tips and the way you actually listened when I talked. I fell for someone who doesn't even exist." "He exists," Jareth insisted. "The person I was with you is who I want to be. Not the vampire king playing political games, but just someone who makes you smile, someone worthy of your trust." "But I can't trust you," Elena said. and the brokenness in her voice shattered something in his chest. "How can I ever trust you again? How do I know any of this is real and not just another manipulation?" He had no answer for that. She was right, he'd destroyed any foundation of trust between them, and no amount of apologies would rebuild it. He'd won countless negotiations through strategy and manipulation, but he had no idea how to fix what he'd broken here. "You can't," he admitted. "And I have no right to ask you to try. I just needed you to know that whatever happens, whatever you decide, what I feel for you is real. You changed me, Elena. You made me want to be better." "That's not my job," she said tiredly. "I'm not here to fix broken men, even immortal ones." She turned toward her apartment building. "Goodbye, Jareth. I hope you lose your bet and it costs you everything." He watched her walk away, everything in him screaming to follow, to fix this, to somehow make her understand. But he'd already caused enough damage. The least he could do was respect her wishes and leave her alone. So he stood in the cold February night and watched the only person who'd made him feel alive in centuries disappear through a broken door into a building he could have bought with pocket change, and he let her go. The worst part was knowing that she was right to hate him. 3 days passed, and they were the longest of Jareth's 500-year existence. He didn't return to the cafe, respecting Elena's wishes even as everything in him pulled toward her. Instead, he threw himself into his duties as king, attending council meetings and mediating disputes between vampire factions, all while Vladik watched with smug satisfaction. "Having trouble with your little project?" Vladik asked during a session about territory boundaries. "We're approaching the halfway point of your 3-month deadline, and I haven't seen the girl at your side lately." "That's none of your concern," Jareth replied coldly. "On the contrary, it's very much my concern. The bet was that you'd have her agreeing to marry you, believing you loved her, and presenting her to the court within 3 months. Seems like you've failed on all counts." Vladik leaned back in his chair with satisfaction. "Perhaps you should just concede now and save yourself the embarrassment." "The timeline hasn't ended," Jareth said, though his heart wasn't in the words. He'd already lost everything that mattered: Elena's trust, her smile, the warmth he felt in her presence. Winning the bet would be a hollow victory, but losing would mean giving up his influence over the council, which would embolden the traditionalists who wanted to return to treating humans as prey. It would mean more violence, more deaths, more fear between their species. His personal feelings couldn't outweigh the greater good. On the 4th day, he received an urgent message from one of his human contacts. Elena's mother had taken a turn for the worse and been hospitalized. The medical bills were catastrophic, and Elena was being told they'd have to discontinue treatment if she couldn't pay. Jareth was at the hospital within the hour, moving through the fluorescent-lit corridors with purpose. He found Elena in a waiting room, her head in her hands, still wearing her cafe uniform. She looked up when he approached, and her eyes widened. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice hoarse from crying. "I heard about your mother. I'm taking care of the bills." "I don't want your money," Elena said immediately, but there was no heat in it. She was too exhausted, too scared. "I'm not asking your permission. The bills will be paid, your mother will receive the best care available, and you will not argue with me about this." Jareth sat beside her, maintaining a careful distance. "This isn't part of any bet or game. This is me trying to do one decent thing after causing you so much pain." "I can't accept this," she whispered, but tears were streaming down her face. "I can't afford to owe you. You don't owe me anything. Consider it payment for all the coffee and conversation over the past month." He paused. "How is she?" "Stable, but they say the next 48 hours are critical. If she makes it through that, she'll need extended treatment and rehabilitation, which I can't afford." "Which means?" Elena's voice broke. "She's all I have, Jareth. I can't lose her." Without thinking, he reached out and pulled her against him. Elena stiffened for a moment, then collapsed into his embrace, sobbing against his chest. He held her, one hand smoothing down her back, murmuring reassurances in languages she didn't understand, and wishing desperately that he had the power to fix this. "Let me help," he said quietly. "Please, Elena, let me do this one thing." "Why?" she asked against his chest. "Why do you care?" "Because I love you," he said simply. "Because even if you never forgive me, even if you spend the rest of your life hating me, I can't stand by and watch you suffer when I have the resources to help." Elena pulled back, looking up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "I don't understand you. You're supposed to be a monster. Vampires are supposed to be evil. We're supposed to be a lot of things," Jareth said, "but we're also individuals capable of change. I've been trying to help my people evolve beyond our predatory nature, to find ways to coexist with humans peacefully. It's made me unpopular with the traditionalists, hence the bet they wanted to prove I'd gone soft, lost touch with what vampires really are." "And have you?" Elena asked. "Gone soft?" Completely, he admitted. I met a girl who works too hard and cares too much, and she made me want to be someone better than I am. So yes, I've gone irretrievably soft and I don't regret it. A ghost of a smile crossed Elena's tear-stained face. You're such an idiot frequently, he agreed. They sat in silence for a moment, the hospital humming around them with machines and distant voices. Then Elena said, if you pay for my mom's treatment, I can't pay you back. Ever. And I'll feel obligated to you. Then don't feel obligated. Think of it as reparations for the emotional damage I caused. You can hate me and let me help. The two aren't mutually exclusive. I don't hate you, Elena said quietly. I want to. It would be easier if I did. But I keep thinking about all those nights at the cafe, all those conversations. And even knowing you had ulterior motives, I can't make myself believe it was all fake. It wasn't, Jareth said fervently. Elena, I swear to you, every word I said about enjoying your company, about finding you fascinating and kind and remarkable, all of that was true. The lie was my reason for approaching you initially. Everything that came after was real. How am I supposed to know that, she asked. How do I trust my judgment when I've already been so wrong? Before Jareth could answer, a doctor emerged from the treatment area. Elena jumped up and Jareth stood with her, his hand finding hers instinctively. Ms. Everhart? Your mother is stable. We've got her on medication that seems to be helping, but as I explained, she needs ongoing treatment. I understand there are financial concerns, but the financial concerns are handled. Jareth interrupted smoothly. Whatever Mrs. Everhart needs, provide it. All bills should be sent to this account. He produced a card with contact information and the doctor's eyebrows rose as he recognized the name of one of the city's most prestigious private banking firms. Yes, of course, Mr. Morozov. We'll ensure Mrs. Everhart receives excellent care. The doctor looked between them. She's asking for you, Elena. You can see her now. Elena squeezed Jareth's hand, whether in gratitude or just reflex, he wasn't sure, then followed the doctor. Jareth sank back into his chair, processing the sensation of her hand in his. She'd held his hand. Even knowing what he was, what he'd done, she'd reached for him in that moment of relief. Maybe he hadn't destroyed everything after all. Elena emerged an hour later looking emotionally drained but hopeful. She's doing better. They say if she continues to improve, they'll move her to a regular room tomorrow. That's good news, Jareth said, standing. Do you need anything? Food? Coffee? A ride home? I need to understand what happens now, Elena said. You've paid for my mother's treatment, which probably cost more than I'll make in 5 years. Your bet requires me to agree to marry you within 3 months. Are you going to leverage this? Hold the bills over my head until I agree? The fact that she thought he would hurt worse than any insult she could have thrown. No, the medical care is unconditional. It has nothing to do with the bet, but the bet is still happening, Elena said. What are the consequences if you lose? Jareth hesitated, then decided she deserved the full truth. I'll lose my influence over the council, which will embolden the traditionalist faction. They'll push for a return to old policies treating humans as lesser beings, as prey. The progress I've made toward peaceful coexistence will be undone, and humans will become targets again. There will be deaths, Elena. Innocent people will die because I was too proud to refuse a stupid bet. Elena's face paled. So if you lose, people die, but if you win, if I win, I gain enough political capital to continue pushing for reform. I can protect humans, enforce treaties, and gradually change vampire society from within. But I already know I've lost, he added quietly. Because winning requires you to believe I love you and agree to marry me, and I've destroyed any chance of that happening. So I'll deal with the consequences and do my best to mitigate the damage. What if I agreed? Elena asked suddenly. Jareth's heart stopped. What if I agreed to go along with it? To pretend to be your fiancé, to play the part for your vampire court, to help you win the bet? She wrapped her arms around herself. If it would save lives, prevent violence, I could do that. No, Jareth said immediately, vehemently. Absolutely not. Why not? It solves your problem. Because the bet wasn't just that you'd agree to marry me, it was that you'd believe I love you, that it would be real. If you're just playing a part, Vladek will know. Vampires can sense deception, read heartbeats and micro-expressions. He'd call me out immediately, and you'd have sacrificed your dignity for nothing. Then make me believe it, Elena said desperately. You said you love me. Prove it. Make me trust you again. Make it real. Jareth stared at her, torn between hope and horror. Elena, you're exhausted and scared and feeling obligated because of your mother's bills. This isn't a decision you should make right now. Don't tell me what decisions I should make, she snapped, fire returning to her eyes. I'm an adult and I understand the situation. You need me to sell this engagement to your vampire court. I need my mother to live, and apparently innocent people need you to maintain your political power. So let's make a deal. What kind of deal? Jareth asked warily. You court me properly, no more lies, no more games. You show me the real you, vampire politics and all. You introduce me to your world, explain how it works, and let me make an informed decision about whether I can believe in us. Elena's chin lifted. And if I decide I can trust you, I'll play the perfect fiancé for your court. But if I decide you're still manipulating me, I walk away, and you face the consequences. Do we have a deal? It was a terrible idea. It would mean spending time with her, deepening his feelings for her, all while knowing she was only there out of obligation. It would mean showing her the dangerous, violent parts of his world and risking her safety. It would mean hoping she could forgive him while preparing for the likelihood that she'd walk away when this was over. But it was also a chance, a slim, desperate chance to prove himself worthy of her trust. Deal, Jareth said. But on one condition: your mother's care continues regardless of what you decide. And when this is over, whether you choose to stay or leave, I'll provide enough money to ensure you never have to work yourself to exhaustion again. Your financial security is not contingent on your cooperation. Elena studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, then we have a deal. Then we have a deal, Jareth echoed, and sealed it the vampire way with a small knife. He pricked his finger and offered it to her. Blood to bind the agreement. It's our way. Elena hesitated, then pressed her finger to his, their blood mingling. The bond snapped into place, a magical contract that would hold them both to their word. She gasped, feeling the connection, and Jareth steadied her with a hand on her elbow. What was that? She breathed. A blood oath. You'll feel a pull toward honesty now. A compulsion to uphold your end of the bargain, as will I. He met her eyes. I take this seriously, Elena. I will show you the truth of who and what I am, and I will do everything in my power to earn your trust. But if at the end you decide to walk away, I'll let you go without argument. Okay, she whispered. Then I guess we're doing this. I guess we are, Jareth agreed, and tried to ignore the feeling that he'd just made either the best or worst decision of his immortal life. The courting began the next evening. Jareth picked Elena up from the hospital where she'd been sitting with her mother, who was indeed improving. Mrs. Everhart had been surprised to meet her daughter's new boyfriend, especially one so clearly wealthy and devoted, but she'd been too weak to ask many questions. Elena had promised to explain everything later, once her mother was stronger. Where are we going? Elena asked as they drove through the city, away from the human districts toward the older, darker parts where historic buildings crouched between modern developments. The Crimson Court, Jareth said. The center of vampire government in the Northern Territories. If you're going to understand my world, you need to see where I work. The court was housed in a renovated castle that had been transported stone by stone from Eastern Europe in the 19th century, then rebuilt in the city's heart and disguised as a historical society building. Jareth led Elena through winding corridors lit by crystal chandeliers, past tapestries that were genuinely centuries old, into the heart of vampire power. They passed other vampires in the halls, all with that same pale skin, otherworldly beauty, and predatory grace. Elena tried not to stare, but Jareth could feel her nervousness through the bond they'd formed. He kept a protective hand at the small of her back, a clear signal to any vampires they encountered. She was his and therefore untouchable. This is incredible, Elena whispered as they entered the main chamber, a cavernous room with a domed ceiling painted with scenes of vampire history. It's like stepping into another time. Many of us prefer it that way. We're creatures of tradition, even as we try to adapt to the modern world. Jareth guided her to a balcony overlooking the chamber. This is where the council meets, where decisions affecting thousands of vampires and humans are made. And you lead this? Elena asked. I'm one of several regional kings, but yes, I lead the Northern Territories. It's a position I inherited through bloodline and have maintained through combat, politics, and the occasional assassination attempt. He said it casually, but Elena's eyes widened. People have tried to kill you? Vampires resist change, and I've been pushing for significant changes. Some of my kind view humans as nothing but food sources. They don't appreciate my efforts to establish treaties and protection laws. He gestured to the chamber below. This is why the bet mattered so much. If I'm seen as weak, as having been manipulated by human sentiment, the traditionalists gain power. They'll overturn the protections I've put in place. Elena processed this, her brow furrowed. So your desire for coexistence isn't universal among vampires. Far from it. Many vampires believe we're apex predators and that working with humans rather than hunting them is beneath us. Jareth's jaw tightened. They're wrong, but they're loud and they're powerful. And changing centuries of culture doesn't happen overnight. Why do you care? Elena asked suddenly. You're a vampire. Why does human welfare matter to you? It was a fair question and one he'd asked himself many times. Because I've lived for 5 centuries. and I've seen what happens when power goes unchecked. I've watched civilizations rise and fall, seen wars that accomplished nothing but suffering, and I'm tired of it. We're stronger than humans, yes, but that doesn't make it right to prey on you. And practically speaking, humans outnumber us vastly. If we push you too far, you'll find ways to destroy us. Coexistence isn't just moral, it's survival. Elena studied him in the dim light. You really believe that? I do. And I've spent the last century building toward it, making alliances with human governments, establishing blood banks so we don't need to hunt, creating laws that punish vampires who kill humans. He turned to face her fully. This is who I am, Elena. Not just the man who bought you coffee and made you laugh, also this. A king trying to change his people's nature while fighting off those who want to keep the old ways. It's a lot, Elena admitted. It is, and if you decide you want no part of it, I'll understand. This isn't a safe world, and being associated with me makes you a target. He took her hand carefully. But if you stay, I'll protect you with everything I have. No harm will come to you, I swear it. Elena looked down at their joined hands, her warm and living, his cold and undead. Show me more, she said. I want to understand. Over the following weeks, Jareth introduced Elena to his world piece by piece. He showed her the blood banks where vampires purchased what they needed without hurting anyone. He took her to a vampire hospital where medical researchers worked on ways to synthesize blood so they'd be completely independent of human donors. He introduced her to his allies on the council, vampires who shared his vision of peaceful coexistence, but he also showed her the darker side. He took her to a council session where traditionalists argued for the right to hunt humans in designated territories. He explained the blood feuds between vampire houses that sometimes spilled into human areas. He let her witness an enforcement action when a rogue vampire had been killing humans, and Elena watched from a protected area as Jareth and his guards dealt with the threat with efficient, brutal violence. Is it always like that? She asked afterward, pale but composed. When necessary, Jareth said grimly, wiping blood from his hands. We police our own, and we don't tolerate those who threaten the balance. But yes, violence is part of my world. I won't lie to you about that. Through it all, he was careful never to pressure her, never to push for more than she was willing to give. He courted her with patience, bringing her flowers that weren't roses because she'd mentioned once that she found them cliché. Taking her to quiet restaurants where they could talk without vampire politics intruding. Listening to her fears and doubts without judgment. And slowly, carefully, Elena began to trust him again. Tell me about your past, she said one night as they walked through a park blanketed in March snow. 500 years is a long time. Who were you before you became king? Jareth was quiet for a moment, snowflakes catching in his white hair. I was born in Russia during the early 16th century, during a time of great violence and upheaval. I was turned when I was 28 by a vampire who saw potential in me. I spent the first century learning what I was, fighting in wars, making mistakes. He paused. I've done terrible things, Elena. Killed people who didn't deserve it. Fed without care for the lives I was taking. I was a monster. What changed? Elena asked softly. I fell in love, Jareth admitted, with a human woman named Katya. She was fierce and kind and completely unafraid of me. She made me want to be better. We had 7 years together before she died of fever, and in that time she changed how I saw the world. She made me understand that humans weren't just food, you were people with hopes and dreams and value beyond what you could provide us. You loved her, Elena said, and there was no jealousy in her voice, just understanding. I did. She was the first person who made me question what vampires were supposed to be. After she died, I threw myself into vampire politics, working my way up through the ranks until I had enough power to start making changes. It's been a long, slow process, but everything I've built has been in her memory. He looked at Elena. And then I met you. For the first time in over 2 centuries, I felt that same desire to be better. You remind me why this work matters. Elena slipped her hand into his, and they walked in companionable silence, the night cold and beautiful around them. Jareth felt something settle in his chest, not quite peace, but close. Contentment, perhaps. The feeling of being understood. I'm starting to believe you, Elena said quietly. That you love me. That this is real. Jareth's heart, sluggish and cold as it was, skipped a beat. Elena, I'm not saying I've completely forgiven you for the bet. That still hurts, knowing I was part of a game. But I believe you've changed. I believe you genuinely care about me. She stopped walking and turned to face him. And I think I'm falling in love with you too, which is absolutely terrifying. Why terrifying? Jareth asked, though he could guess. Because you're immortal and I'm not. Because your world is dangerous, and I'm just a girl who worked in a coffee shop. Because we're from completely different worlds, and I don't know how this could possibly work long term. She met his eyes. But when I'm with you, I feel seen in a way I've never felt before. Like I matter. Like I'm more than just my circumstances. You are, Jareth said fervently, cupping her face in his hands. You're brilliant and brave and remarkably kind despite every reason life has given you to be bitter. You're the best person I've met in 5 centuries, human or vampire. You're biased, Elena said, but she was smiling. Completely, he agreed and kissed her. It was their first real kiss. The previous pecks had been chaste and careful. This was different. This was passion and promise, cold meeting warm, immortal meeting mortal, and everything in Jareth's being singing that this was right. Elena wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, and he held her like she was the most precious thing in existence. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena laughed breathlessly. So that's what kissing a vampire is like? Disappointed? Jareth asked, unable to stop smiling. Absolutely not, Elena said, and kissed him again. They were so focused on each other that they didn't notice the figure watching from the shadows, eyes glinting with malicious satisfaction. The summons came 3 days later. Jareth was called before the full council for a formal inquiry into his relationship with a human. Vladek had apparently been filing complaints, arguing that Jareth was compromising his position and bringing disgrace to vampire nobility by pursuing a commoner. They're going to make me prove the relationship is real, Jareth told Elena as they prepared for the council session. They'll question you, test whether you genuinely believe I love you, examine whether this could possibly be the real thing or just manipulation. I can handle it, Elena said, though he could hear her heartbeat racing. She wore a dress he'd bought her, deep green, that brought out the warmth in her skin, expensive but understated. I've sat with you through council meetings. I know how this works. Not like this, Jareth said grimly. They're going to try to shake you, to make you doubt. Vladek will do everything he can to prove you're just a pawn I'm using. And if they succeed, if they determine this is still part of the bet and not genuine. He didn't finish the sentence. They both knew the consequences. Then we show them they're wrong, Elena said firmly. She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. I love you, Jareth. I'm choosing to love you despite the complicated beginning, despite the danger, despite everything. That's real, and I'll make them see it. The council chamber was packed with vampires when they arrived, not just the ruling members but dozens of nobles and courtiers who'd come to witness the spectacle. Jareth led Elena to the center of the room, his hand never leaving hers, while the council arranged themselves on their elevated seats. Vladek sat among them, his smile predatory. Thank you for joining us, cousin, and you must be the famous Elena Everhart. Tell me, do you know why you're here? I'm here because you can't accept that your king might have genuine feelings for a human, Elena said, her voice steady despite her nervousness. And because you made a cruel bet that you're now losing. Murmurs rippled through the assembled vampires. Speaking so boldly to a council member was either brave or foolish, possibly both. The girl has spirit, one of the council members noted. That much is clear. Spirit doesn't prove authenticity, Vladek countered. Jareth is over 500 years old and one of the most skilled manipulators in vampire history. Making a human girl believe she's special would be child's play for him. Then what would convince you? Jareth asked coldly. What proof would satisfy you that my feelings are genuine? Let us examine her, another council member said, an ancient vampire named Isadora, with silver eyes that missed nothing. Let us see for ourselves whether this human truly believes you love her, or if doubt lingers in her heart. Elena's hand tightened on Jareth's. What does that mean? It means they want to read you, Jareth explained quietly. Vampires have abilities beyond physical strength. Some of us can sense emotions, read surface thoughts, detect lies. If you consent, they'll examine your feelings to determine if they're genuine. And if I don't consent, then they'll assume you're lying, and I'll lose the bet along with my political standing. He met her eyes. But I won't force you to submit to this. The choice is yours. Elena looked at the assembled vampires, then back at Jareth. Will it hurt? No. It will feel invasive and uncomfortable, but there's no pain. Then do it, Elena said, lifting her chin. I have nothing to hide. Isadora descended from her seat with fluid grace, approaching Elena with the careful movements of a predator. You're certain, child? Once I begin, you cannot withdraw consent. I will see everything, your doubts, your fears, your true feelings about the vampire who brought you here. I'm certain, Elena said firmly. Isadora placed cold fingers against Elena's temples and power flooded the space between them. Jareth watched, helpless, as Elena's eyes went unfocused, as centuries-old magic sifted through her emotions and memories. He saw her flinch, saw her struggle to stay still, and every protective instinct screamed at him to intervene. But he forced himself to remain motionless. This was Elena's choice, and he had to trust her. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only minutes, Isadora stepped back. Her expression was unreadable as she returned to her seat and conferred quietly with the other council members. Elena swayed, and Jareth caught her immediately, pulling her against him. "Are you all right? That was horrible," she whispered, like someone rifling through my brain. "I know, I'm sorry, you were incredibly brave." The council finished their deliberation, and Isadora spoke. "We have examined the human's heart and mind. Her feelings are genuine. She loves Jareth Morozov despite understanding his nature and the circumstances of their meeting. There is doubt, yes, and lingering hurt from his initial deception, but the love is real." Relief crashed through Jareth so intensely it was almost painful. She'd passed. They'd passed. The bet was won. But Vladek wasn't finished. Her feelings are genuine now, perhaps. But the bet was whether Jareth could make her fall in love with him and agree to marry him. Has there been a proposal? Has she agreed to become his bride? Everyone turned to look at them, and Jareth realized the trap. Of course Vladek would push for this. The full terms of the bet required not just love but an accepted proposal. And Jareth hadn't asked because he'd been too focused on earning Elena's trust, on not pressuring her, on doing this right. Now in front of the entire council with their political future hanging in the balance, he had to propose. If Elena said no, he'd lose everything. And she'd know he was asking because he had to, not necessarily because he wanted to. Jareth looked at Elena, seeing his same realization reflected in her eyes. This was the moment. Everything came down to this. He could try to delay, argue that the proposal wasn't part of the public record, but that would only confirm weakness. Instead, he did the only thing he could. He told the truth. "Elena," he said softly, so only she could hear despite the dozens of vampires listening with supernatural hearing. "I'm going to ask you a question now, and it's going to seem like I'm only asking because the bet requires it. Maybe I am. But I need you to know that regardless of political consequences, regardless of what I stand to lose or gain, my feelings are real. You've become the most important person in my immortal life, and I would count myself blessed to spend whatever time we have together. The proposal may be politically necessary, but the love behind it is genuine." Then, in front of the entire assembled court, Jareth Morozov, Vampire King of the Northern Territories, dropped to one knee before a human girl from a coffee shop. "Elena Everhart," he said, his voice carrying through the chamber. "You've changed me in ways I didn't think possible. You've made me want to be better, do better, fight harder for a world where creatures like me and people like you can coexist in peace. You've given me hope I'd lost centuries ago. I'm asking you not because a bet requires it, but because I genuinely want to spend my existence with you however you'll have me, for however long you'll allow. Will you marry me?" The chamber was utterly silent. Every vampire present watched Elena's face, waiting for her response. Jareth could hear her heart racing, could see the emotions flickering across her expression: fear, love, uncertainty, determination. "Before I answer," Elena said, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness, "I have a question for the council." "Speak," Isadora said. "What happens if I say yes? What would my life look like as the human bride of a vampire king? Because I'm not going to agree to something I don't understand." It was brilliantly done, turning the proposal into a negotiation, asserting her agency even in this vulnerable moment. Jareth felt a surge of pride. "You would be under Jareth's protection, which means no vampire would dare harm you," Isadora explained. "You would likely live in the court, attend vampire functions, serve as a bridge between our world and yours. It would be dangerous. You'd make enemies simply by existing. But you'd also have power and influence, the ability to shape policy and advocate for human interests. And when I die," Elena asked bluntly, "because I'm human and mortal and Jareth will outlive me by centuries, that would be for you and Jareth to negotiate," Isadora said. "Some humans in relationships with vampires choose to be turned. Others live out their natural lives and leave their vampire partners to grieve. The choice would be yours." Elena processed this, then turned back to Jareth, who was still kneeling before her. "If I say yes, are you going to turn me into a vampire without asking? Make that decision for me?" "Never," Jareth said immediately. "I would never take that choice from you. If you want mortality, I'll treasure every year we have together. If you eventually decide you want to be turned, we'll discuss it, but it will always be your decision. And you'll really marry me? This isn't just about winning the bet. The bet will end tonight regardless of your answer. But I would very much like to marry you, Elena. Not for political gain, not to win a game, but because I love you and I want to spend my life with you." Elena smiled, tears glittering in her eyes. "Then yes, you dramatic immortal idiot. Yes, I'll marry you." The chamber erupted in chaos, some vampires applauding, others protesting, Vladek shouting objections that were drowned out by the noise. But Jareth heard none of it. He surged to his feet and pulled Elena into his arms, kissing her deeply while the vampire court watched their king claim his human bride. When they finally broke apart, Elena was laughing and crying at the same time. "Did we just get engaged in front of a room full of vampires?" "We did," Jareth confirmed, feeling lighter than he had in decades. "And now I need to give you a ring because I proposed without one, which is embarrassingly unprepared of me." "I don't need a ring right now," Elena said. "I just need you." "You have me," Jareth promised, "for as long as you want me." The council formally acknowledged their engagement, and Vladik was forced to concede the bet. Jareth had gained the political capital he needed, maintained his position, and secured the votes to continue his reform efforts. But more importantly, he'd won Elena's trust and love, which felt infinitely more valuable than any political victory. The celebration that followed was both vampire and human tradition, blood wine and champagne, formal dancing and contemporary music, ancient rituals and modern vows. Elena met dozens of vampires who were curious about the human who'd captured their king's heart, and she handled each interaction with grace and intelligence that made Jareth fall even deeper in love with her. "I can't believe you're going to be vampire royalty," Elena's mother said when she'd recovered enough to attend a small family gathering a few weeks later. She'd been shocked by the engagement but delighted to see her daughter happy, and pragmatic enough to appreciate the financial security Jareth provided. "My daughter married to a king." "A vampire king," Elena corrected with a smile, "which is somehow even weirder." "But you love him," Mrs. Everhart said. "It wasn't a question." "I do," Elena confirmed. "I really, really do." The wedding was planned for June, giving Elena time to adjust to her new role and allowing Jareth to secure the political changes he'd been fighting for. With renewed authority, he pushed through new protection laws for humans, expanded the blood bank system, and established harsh penalties for vampires who hunted mortals without consent. But he also made time for Elena, teaching her about vampire culture, introducing her to allies who'd support her, and spending quiet nights just talking and being together. They discussed the future, whether Elena wanted to be turned eventually or preferred to remain human. They talked about having a human wedding ceremony in addition to the vampire one, about where they'd live, about what her role would be. "I want to work with human refugees," Elena decided one evening as they sat in Jareth's private quarters in the court. "People who've been hurt by vampires or caught in the crossfire of your politics. I want to help them rebuild their lives." "That's perfect," Jareth said, pulling her closer. "You'll be brilliant at it, and it'll strengthen the alliance between our peoples." "I also want to keep taking classes," Elena continued. "Finish my degree. I know I don't technically need to work anymore, but I want to. I want to prove I'm more than just the Vampire King's human bride." "You're already so much more than that," Jareth assured her. "But I support whatever you want to do. This is your life, Elena. I'm just grateful to be part of it." She turned in his arms, studying his face, the sharp features, the silver eyes, the white hair that marked him as ancient and powerful. "Do you ever regret it? The bet, I mean. If you hadn't been so arrogant, we might have met naturally." "I regret the hurt I caused you," Jareth said honestly. "I regret treating you as a pawn instead of a person. But I don't regret that the bet brought us together. Maybe it wasn't the ideal beginning, but it led us here, and I wouldn't change that." "Good answer," Elena said, and kissed him. The wedding took place on a warm June evening in the gardens of the Crimson Court, with both vampire and human guests in attendance. Elena wore a dress of white silk that seemed to glow in the moonlight, and Jareth wore traditional vampire formal wear, all black with silver embroidery that marked him as royalty. The ceremony blended traditions from both cultures. They exchanged vows in English and Russian, mixed blood and champagne in the ceremonial chalice, and sealed their union with a kiss that drew applause from vampires and humans alike. "You're stuck with me now," Elena whispered as they danced their first dance as husband and wife. "I can think of worse fates," Jareth replied, spinning her gracefully across the floor. "Being married to an immortal vampire king is pretty weird," Elena admitted. "I'm still getting used to it. Being married to a compassionate, stubborn human who makes me want to be better than I am is pretty wonderful," Jareth countered. "I think I got the better end of this deal." "Definitely," Elena agreed, and laughed when he dipped her dramatically. As the night wore on and the celebration continued, Jareth reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A cruel bet made in arrogance had transformed into genuine love. A vampire king who'd thought himself above human emotion had been completely undone by a tired girl in a coffee shop, and a young woman struggling to survive had become the most powerful human in vampire society, using her position to advocate for her people and push for change. It wasn't the romance either of them had imagined, but it was real and hard-won and deeply, genuinely theirs. I love you, Jareth said as they stood on a balcony overlooking the party, Elena tucked against his side. I know I say it constantly now, but I spent centuries not feeling anything close to this. I'm making up for lost time. I love you too, Elena replied, reaching up to cup his face. Even though you're dramatic and overprotective and still way too good at manipulation. I'll work on that, Jareth promised. Don't work too hard, I kind of like you the way you are, flaws and all. She kissed him softly. My vampire king. Your vampire king, Jareth agreed, for as long as you'll have me. They stayed on that balcony long after the party wound down, watching the stars and talking about their future. There would be challenges ahead, political battles, threats from traditionalists, the eventual question of Elena's mortality. But they'd face it together, this unlikely pair brought together by cruelty and choosing love instead. And in the end, the vampire king who'd made a bet to win a human heart had lost everything he'd thought mattered, and gained the only thing that truly did, someone to share his immortal existence with. Someone who made eternity seem not long enough. Somewhere in the court, Vladek nursed his wounded pride and plotted his exile to the western wastes. But neither Jareth nor Elena spared him a thought. They were too busy building their future, one day at a time, proving that love could bloom even from the cruelest beginnings. The coffee shop on Morrison Street closed a year later, not because of tragedy, but because Elena had moved on to bigger things. But sometimes on quiet nights, Jareth and Elena would walk past it hand in hand, remembering where their story had begun. A vampire king looking for a way to win a bet, a struggling barista just trying to survive another shift. Neither could have predicted how profoundly they'd change each other's lives. But looking back, neither would have wanted it any other way. Their love story had started with deception and cruelty, but it had become something real and beautiful, and enduring proof that even immortal creatures could change, could grow, could learn to love genuinely and deeply. And they lived not happily ever after, because real life was more complicated than fairy tales, but truly, deeply, fiercely happy together. A vampire and his human bride, navigating two worlds and building something new in the space between. That was their story. A bet, a coffee shop, and a love neither had expected but both had chosen. And it was, in the end, exactly what both of them needed. Years passed and Elena became a force in vampire-human relations, using her unique position to broker treaties and protect vulnerable humans. She finished her degree and established a foundation to help those affected by vampire violence. And through it all, Jareth was beside her, protecting her, supporting her, loving her with an intensity that never diminished. They never forgot the bet that had brought them together, but they transformed it from a source of shame into a reminder of how far they'd come. At every anniversary, Jareth would take Elena to that gallery where Vladek had first threatened to expose them, and they'd stand before the painting of the figure caught between light and shadow. Still stuck in the in-between? Elena would ask. No, Jareth would reply, pulling her close. I finally found where I belong. And Elena would smile, because she'd found where she belonged too, not in the human world or the vampire world, but in the space between, with a vampire king who'd learned to love and a human woman who'd learned to trust. Their story became legend in vampire society, the tale of the king who'd made a cruel bet and discovered genuine love. Young vampires heard it and learned that change was possible, that humans were more than prey, that love could bridge even the widest divides. And the humans who knew the truth that the powerful vampire advocate for human rights had started as a barista, working herself to exhaustion, took hope from it. If Elena Everhart could rise from poverty to become the vampire king's queen and use that position to protect her people, then anything was possible. But for Jareth and Elena themselves, the legend didn't matter. What mattered were the quiet moments, Elena falling asleep against his chest while he read to her, Jareth surprising her with rare books she'd mentioned wanting, the easy comfort of being truly known and loved anyway. I'm glad you were arrogant enough to accept that bet, Elena told him one evening, decades into their marriage. She'd chosen to be turned 5 years earlier, after her mother had passed peacefully and she'd accomplished her human goals. Now she had eternity to spend with the vampire she loved, and she'd never regretted the choice. I'm glad you were brave enough to give me a second chance, Jareth replied, running his fingers through her hair, darker now, with the supernatural sheen all vampires had, but still unmistakably Elena. We make a pretty good team, Elena said. The best, Jareth agreed, and kissed his wife, his partner, his equal, his Elena under the stars that would shine for centuries more, illuminating their endless love story. And they both knew with absolute certainty that choosing each other had been the best decision either had ever made. The bet was won. The game was over, but the love, the real, genuine, hard-won love that would last forever. Because in the end the vampire king had fallen, completely and irrevocably for the poor girl from the coffee shop, and she had fallen just as hard for him, seeing past the monster to the person beneath. Their love was real, it was tested, it was earned, and it was eternal. That was how their story ended, not with tragedy or heartbreak, but with two people from impossible worlds finding their way to each other and choosing, every single day, to stay. It was a happy ending, hard-won and well-deserved. And in a world of darkness and danger, that was the most magical thing of all.